Good afternoon, everyone. It is Monday, February the 8th, 2021. It is currently 1:06 p.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from Victory Baptist Church, located right here in Ovalo, Texas, where the dreaded polar vortex that people warned us about, it really hasn't arrived. It's about 55, 56 degrees outside. It's nice and sunny. My friends who lived in Nebraska, who live in Nebraska, they told me this morning that it was 9 below zero with the wind chill factor. And I was like, well, that proves you live in a state that's cursed and you probably should flee, right? Because that's ridiculous. 9 below zero. I don't care if that's with the wind chill. That's a sign that you should pack up and move, and you should move here to West Texas, and you should attend Victory Baptist Church. Anyone right now suffering through the polar vortex, it's a sign that you should move right here to the Abilene, Texas area and become a member of Victory Baptist Church. I think that's what that proves. So all of the warnings that we were going to be impacted, I guess it hasn't happened. But so it's a nice day. It's a little chilly. I mean, it's in the 50s. I know. Okay, I would prefer it to be a little warmer, but it's a nice day. But here I am once again inside the sanctuary of Victory Baptist Church. The building is empty. It's just me. It's you, if you're listening to me live right now. And I'm sitting here at a table, and I've got Bible dictionaries, I've got Bibles, I've got my iPad, I've got notebooks, I've got pencils, and we are about, this is a bad sign. I'm having trouble speaking. This is a bad sign. We are about to engage in hopefully some serious Bible study, and I invite you to participate. Now, this is being done as a Bible study exercise. That usually means that I'm trying to guide you into the study. And sometimes I'll take you so far and kind of hand it over. But in this particular case, I think I'm going to do most of it for you. And the reason I am is because yesterday, when we did a Bible study exercise on this exact topic, I think I left a lot for you in that one. And I believe that I know for a fact that I made a mistake. I missed something very important, and I did not catch it till later in the evening. So we're going to try to clean all of this up, clarify things, but we're going to do some work. We're going to do some study, and I like to invite you to not just be a passive listener, but an active learner. So get out a Bible, a notebook, something to write with. You may want to pull up the Blue Letter Bible app. You may want to have a Bible dictionary, whatever tools you have available. If you don't have any tools at all, just open a Bible, a notebook, and let's get ready to dig in. If you are listening to me live on this Monday afternoon, you have the ability to chat with me at any time. If you're using the Spreaker app, just tap on the little chat icon. And, well, you can say hello, you can tell me where you're listening from, you can ask questions, you can throw in thoughts. What I do ask, if as I'm working through this, if you already have a different conclusion or a different opinion, wait until I get closer to the end, because I'm not going to be able to stop trying to guide us to my conclusion and then stop to go to your conclusion and then try to come back to my conclusion. But if you have questions or if you need clarification, then by all means jump in or just say hello. It will anything you type in the chat will pop up right here to my left on the iPad, on the laptop that is sitting to my left. On the right is an iPad, but that has my notes. So are you ready? Are you ready to do some Bible study? I hope you are. I hope you're enjoying these Bible study exercises. I'm doing my best to put them out there to really get you studying the Word of God. You can get so distracted by so many things going on in this world, but what we need is the Word of God more than we have ever needed it, and hopefully that's what we are accomplishing. So are you ready? All right, here we go. The first thing we have to start with is the email, all right? Yesterday, when I got home from church, I received an email from a listener, and they sent me an email, and that started this entire Bible study exercise journey on the topic that we are discussing. And so I'm going to go back to the email. What I'm going to do is basically kind of walk you through everything that happened to get us to this point today so that everyone will be on the same page. No one will be confused because the key word here is clarification. I want to clarify and really try to make sure that we understand this to the best of my ability. So are you ready? Here we go. This is the email that I received yesterday. My wife and I were working through Ephesians in advance and in coordination with our church's Sunday sermons. When we got to Ephesians chapter 3, verse 10, we both had questions about the principalities and powers in the heavenly places. When consulting study Bible notes and a couple of online commentaries, they indicate this meant angels. When Sunday service covered this topic, the pastor indicated dogmatically that this refers not to angels, but to the devil. Obviously, this left both my wife and I confused, and I was wondering if you would be willing to do a Bible study podcast on this topic to discuss what this passage might mean. I included a link to the sermon and the sermon in question in case you wish to see the context of his statement. Although I could also see this sermon frustrating you in some aspects. Okay, so wonderful email. And I always say this, if you email me with something you want to study, some question you have, that goes to the front of the list. I always have a list of things that I want to talk about. Like yesterday, I had 5 things I wanted to do Sunday afternoon. I didn't get to them, and part of the reason is when I got home yesterday after church, I forgot to plug in my laptop. So when I got back out here for Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening live broadcasting, my laptop's battery was almost dead, and so I was afraid to try to do another broadcast because I didn't want the laptop to die in the middle of the live broadcast. So, but I always have a list. But if you email me something, I try my best to move that to the top. In fact, it always at least goes to the top of the list for immediate consideration. But sometimes I may look and go, I don't know what I can really do with this. I don't know if I should talk about this. And so sometimes sometimes I don't feel qualified to discuss the particular situation, but I will always do my best. So great question. Basically the question, if we were to really think about what they're asking, for the most part, they want to know who are the principalities and powers mentioned in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 10. Well, let's go to Ephesians chapter 3, verse 10, just to read it. Ephesians chapter 3, verse 10. To the intent that now unto the principalities and powers in heavenly places might be known by the church the manifold wisdom of God. All right? So, who are these principalities and powers? The 2 options the email presents, angels, or is it just the devil, as this pastor in the sermon they sent me stated dogmatically? All right? Interesting question, interesting perspective. So I came here to the church, turned on the microphone and said, let's do a Bible study exercise. And what I did is I took a section of the sermon. In the sermon, he reaches his final point, and the final point is based, from everything I can tell, from Ephesians chapter 3, verse 10. And that is when that's when the train went off the tracks. That's when the car left the road. Because as I started listening to the sermon and reviewing that part of the sermon live on the air, it led to a massive detour. And this detour occurred because of the following reasons. Number one, I was massively confused by the point the pastor was trying to make. I was completely confused in the sermon. It's like, okay, here's the text of Scripture, Ephesians chapter 3. I don't know exactly which verse he started with. Maybe he started in verse 9. But in verse 9, maybe verse 8, verse 9, and then verse 10, which says, to the intent that now unto the principalities and powers in heavenly places might be known by the church the manifold wisdom of God. I was perplexed because if that was the text, how was he making the point that he was making in his sermon? Because the final point that he made, supposedly based off Ephesians 3:10, was this, and this is somewhat of a paraphrase, but it's pretty close. We have been graced by God to stand against the devil. And as I was listening to the sermon live on the air, I was like, well, I don't, where does that point come from? That's not, Ephesians 3:10 has nothing to do with you and I standing against the devil and that we've been graced by God to do this. He threw in the word that we've been graced by God to stand against the devil with confidence. And I'm like, what? I'm not seeing that in verse 10. I'm not seeing that at all in verse 10. Let me read Ephesians 3:10 from a different translation, because I'm just still to this. I have thought about this now for hours, and I just have no clue what that pastor was doing with the text. I have no idea. Ephesians 3:10. His intent was that now, through the church, the manifold wisdom of God should be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms. All right. What does that have to do with me being graced by God to stand against the devil with confidence? That has nothing. So I was perplexed. And because that confusion started, it really began to distract me and make me take a massive detour from actually answering the question that the people asked. Now, to be fair, the email said, God, what does the text? In fact, let me go back to the email. To be fair, I could use this as justification. Would you be willing to do a Bible study podcast on this topic to discuss what this passage might mean? So to be fair, they didn't just ask about principalities and powers. They kind of asked about the passage itself. So in some ways, maybe I haven't received a reply from them. They may not have listened to the study that I did yesterday. I'm hoping that what I did yesterday was beneficial to them. But I was so distracted by, what are you doing? Like, how is that the point in your sermon? It was almost like he had a point and he just wanted to make the point, and it wasn't that the point was coming from the text. Sometimes pastors bring points to the text. They've already made up, here's the points I want to make. Here's what I want to preach on. Now just find the text of scripture that I'll just use to make these points, or that I'll just kind of force my points upon. We should study the text, and the text should bring out the points that, not that we're making, but that the text is making. My job is simply to proclaim what the point the text is making, not my point, but the point the text is making. And Ephesians 3:10 has nothing to do with you and I being graced by God to stand against the devil. It doesn't. It's making a point about that within the church, God is using that inside the church, his manifold wisdom is going to be put on display and be made manifest to principalities and powers, whoever they may be, whatever they may be, it doesn't matter. The question is, the real question, well, we'll get to that in a moment. So the first thing that confused me was the point the pastor is trying to make. Number two, the second thing that caused some major distraction and I was trying to figure out was the sermon didn't appear to be attempting to actually study the text. Like, if you go back and listen to part one, because I play the whole clip, and it's like a 9-minute section of the sermon, and he just makes a passing reference to the verse. He reads it briefly, but the entire point, in other words, he wasn't exegeting the text. He wasn't preaching the text. He was preaching his point. It would have been better for him just to preach a sermon saying, here are the 3 points I want to make for you today. And I'm not even going to quote a text of scripture, because it's like the text of scripture really had nothing to do with what he was saying. So as I was listening to this, it kept distracting me and taking me further and further away. In other words, it was like this major detour. Like, hey, this road is closed for the next 5 miles, and you're going to have to take a detour that's going to go 20 miles out of the way to get around all of this mess. Well, I took a 20-mile detour, and by the time when I looked over at the time that I'd already been teaching, it was almost at an hour. So when I finally got to principalities and powers and who they are, it was insufficient. It was inadequate. It was bad because I ran out of time. And I was sitting here looking at the battery going, my laptop is going to die, and that's going to be the end of this live broadcast. So those are two things that distracted me. Number one, I was confused by the point the pastor was trying to make. Number two, the sermon wasn't attempting to actually study the text. And number three, the question the text would lead to was ignored. Like in the sermon, he should have been trying to answer the question the text would lead any good Bible student to asking. Any freshman in Bible college, kids and youth group should see the question. When you read that text, Ephesians 3:10, the question is, how is the manifold wisdom of God made known to principalities and powers through the church? If you're there preaching to people, okay, in this church, how is this church making manifest to principalities and powers, whoever they may be, how are we making manifest to them the manifold wisdom of God? How is that occurring in the church? That's the real question the text asks. That's what you really have to study. So I really kind of addressed all of those issues, but that really leaves us with the ultimate question. Who are the principalities and powers? Who are they? Their pastor dogmatically said it's Satan. It's not angels. He said some people say it's angels. It's not. It is Satan. And again, I just find it strange because it says principalities, plural, and powers, plural, in heavenly places. And he's like, no, that just refers to one spiritual individual. That just refers to Satan. That's it. But he didn't offer any explanation. He didn't offer any study in the Greek. He did nothing. It was really weird. And then what also was really weird is he said the way that the church, now he did try to answer the question briefly, the way the church manifests the manifold wisdom of God to Satan is by how we live. See, we live a certain way, and then we show the wisdom of God to Satan. And it just seems like, I don't even know if that actually answered the question. So by the time, what I should have done, I should have just stopped and said, okay, let's try to deal with this sermon and let's try to deal with what's going on here. And then next time we'll talk about principalities and powers. I failed because when I should have stopped, I kept going. And then at the very end, I tried to just in a very scattered way, tried to address the issue of principalities and powers. So to the people who asked the original question, I apologize at my poor attempt to answer your question, but I don't blame anyone else. It was my own fault. I allowed that sermon to distract me. But at the same time, even though I do apologize, at the same time, I feel that what I did was necessary because I want people who listen to a sermon to really think about if I didn't really address what's really going on in that text, then I wouldn't be doing my job, right? So I messed up. I should have just said, hey, I'm not going to be able to answer your question now because we're going to have to address this, but next time I will. But I tried to do both and I did it poorly. So I'm going to try to clean everything up and clarify everything today. So are you ready? All right, here we go. We've got some work to do, all right? We got to figure out principalities and powers. Who are they, all right? What are they? How do we understand them, okay? Now, the phrase principalities and powers occurs 6 times in the Bible in the King James Version and the New King James Version. Other translations render it rulers and authorities, or forces and authorities, or rulers and powers. So the King James is the one that used principalities and powers. It's used 6 times in the King James Version of the Bible. Now, I also made another mistake yesterday. I made it very clear that one thing we have to do is we've got to remove our presuppositions from the text. There's 2 things. Whenever we get ready to study the Bible, there's 2 things, and I always use this in a graphic way. There's 2 things, in a sense, we have to take out back and we have to put down. Right? I sometimes call it, fluffy. Fluffy, our past understanding is our pet Fluffy. And Fluffy has to be put down because if we use our past understanding whenever we study a text today, then any past error will simply become the error that we find today. We've got to set aside all of our past understanding, and we have to set aside. That's the first thing we have to set aside, our past understanding. We not just have to set it down, we have to put it down. Right? And I'm using hyperbolic language. I'm not calling for killing any actual thing, but we have to kill our past understanding because that will blind us to seeing anything, to correcting anything that we learned in the past. So we have to set aside past studies, past notes, past sermons, and say, here's the text today. Let me study it new today. Let me study it afresh today. Show me what maybe I missed last time, errors I may have made. It requires great humility to do that, even as a pastor. Look, I have literally preached and then realized that, you know what, the things I've preached in the past were wrong. And you know what? You can't be afraid to change. It's not about ego. It's about truth. So just set aside your previous understanding. And the second thing you have to set aside is any presupposition you bring to the text. Any ideas you bring to the text. You got to set aside all of those presuppositions, all of that previous understanding. You got to set that aside and look at the text new. I think as soon as we hear the words principalities and powers, everyone brings a presupposition and maybe previous understanding to the text. I think the default presupposition is when I hear principalities and I hear powers, that's got to be spiritual beings. That's either angels or the devil or demons or what. We just immediately place it in the spiritual realm. And I'm not saying that that's never the case. I just think we have to be careful because I think that presupposition can blind us. What we have to do is, who are the principalities and powers, and forget anything that we've ever learned in the past and forget all of our presuppositions. Don't even go with the presupposition, well, it has to be either angels or Satan. Are you sure? Are you sure it has to be referring to spiritual beings? Are you 100% sure it has to be? Does it do that in every situation? That is what we're going to look at today. All right? So you got all of that? Here we go. The presupposition we bring is it has to be referring to spiritual beings. Now, yesterday, when we started working through this, the passage that threw me off was Romans chapter 8, which was remember it's this phrase, principalities and powers, is used 6 times in the King James. And the first one that we looked at was Romans chapter 8. And for some reason, I wasn't prepared for what I saw there. I don't know why. I don't know what I was thinking, but as soon as I read it, I realized, I'm in trouble here. I need to stop right now. But I did the best I could, but now we're going to try to clean it up. Romans chapter 8, verse 37. All right, here we go. Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. That's Romans 8:37. Now Paul continues in verse 38. For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come. Now stop right there. That places angels and principalities and powers. So immediately when I read that, I'm like, wait a minute. So are principalities angelic beings? Are principalities angelic beings? Are you saying that angels are good, principalities are bad? Are you saying that angels mean good and bad and principalities is something else? How do we understand this? That really threw me off. And the King James is the one that does that. It has angels, principalities, and powers. Now, if you pull up Romans 8:37 and other English translations, let's do that really quick. Let's go to Romans 8:37. Give me 1 second. I'm doing a refresh. Romans 8:37. Okay. I'm just checking my email. Make sure no one has emailed me while I'm live on the air asking me a question. All right. Romans 8:37. Let's pull up all the English translations. The good way to do this, if you just go to Google, type in Romans 8:37, look down to the entry for BibleHub.com. That just gives you all the English translations on one page. It's very simple, easy tool, absolutely free. All right. So if you ever need to know this. All right. Or did I say Romans 8:37? Romans 8:38 would be the correct reference. Romans 8:38. Here we go. I think I made the same mistake yesterday. Romans 8:38. For I'm convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future nor any powers. All right, so that doesn't separate. That says angels or demons. So does that mean I go back to the King James and say, wait a minute, angels, principalities. So does that mean principalities are demons and angels? Is that how that's working? It just says angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future any powers. Let's go to the New Living Translation, Romans 8:38. I am convinced that nothing can ever separate us from God's love, neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither our fears for today nor our worries about tomorrow, not even the powers of hell can separate us from God's love. All right, ESV. Now listen to this one. This one's very important. For I am sure that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers. Now that's interesting. Angels, rulers. Angels. Now, angels could include, obviously, any angelic being, good or bad, a fallen angel or not. Rulers. Is that now that seems to be possibly connected with the word principalities. So that, wait a minute, does that mean that principalities could be something other than angelic beings? This just started getting me thinking. All right, Berean Study Bible. For I'm convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor principalities, they do the same thing as the King James. The Berean Literal Bible does the same thing, nor angels nor principalities. So many separate angels and principalities. In fact, a large number of the translations do that. All right, so that got me thinking, well, wait a minute. So I've had the presupposition that anytime I see principalities and powers, I should just always understand, oh, that's angelic beings. That's angelic beings. That is a wrong presupposition. Romans 8:38 begins to give us an idea that maybe that's not always correct. So what is this saying? Well, think about it this way. Now, it could be that we understand Romans 8:38 this way, that neither angels nor principalities, fallen angels, nor powers. Now, powers could be a lot of, we could refer to, we'll have to get to powers in a minute, nor things present, nor things to come. Could it be that principalities there is just to be understood as demonic forces, or is this saying neither, listen, angels nor rulers, earthly rulers, leaders, those who have power, earthly leaders who have power, whether that power is good or bad, even if that power is demonically influenced, none of that can separate me from the love of God. Neither spiritual power nor earthly power can separate me from the love of God. If so, then that could mean principalities there is not there used to be a reference to spiritual beings, but it could be talking about earthly rulers. That's interesting. So let's see if we have anything to support this idea. Titus 3:1. Titus 3:1 is one of the 6 places where principalities and powers is used, and look what happens in Titus 3:1. Go to Titus chapter 3, verse 1. Titus chapter 3, verse 1. Look what we read. Titus chapter 3, verse 1. Now, this is very important, all right? Paul telling Titus what Titus is to do, how he's to operate, work in the church. Titus chapter 3, verse 1. Put them in mind to be subject to principalities and powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work. Well, clearly Paul is not telling Titus, hey, submit to demons, right? Submit to evil spirits. Clearly he's not telling them to do that. No. What is he telling them to do? He is telling them to be in subjection to earthly powers, to earthly rulers. Principalities and powers can just speaking about those who are ruling and authority, whether spiritual or earthly. So the way we understand whether it's referring to a spiritual entity or an earthly entity has to be sometimes the way the verse is written and the context in which it is used. Let's look at Titus 3:1 in a different translation. Titus chapter 3, verse 1 in a different translation. We read this, Titus 3:1. Remind the people to be subject to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready to do whatsoever is good, to slander no one, to be peaceable and considerate, and always to be gentle toward everyone. This is telling the church how to respond to earthly authority. Be subject to the rulers, to the authority. Be subject or to the principalities and powers. Not telling them to submit to demons, obviously not. One commentary puts it this way. Titus 3:1 refers to these powers as governmental authorities whom the Lord has placed over the people for their protection and welfare. These authorities are the representatives of God on earth, and submission to him involves submission to those authorities. Those who rebel against earthly authorities are rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. See Romans chapter 13, where the same principle is. Be in subjection, be in subjection. So here, principalities and powers means it doesn't always refer to the devil. Even if you go with that theory, it doesn't refer to demonic spirits. It doesn't have to refer to anything spiritual. It can refer to earthly authority, earthly power. Now, that doesn't mean in every case. That doesn't mean in every case. Now, if we go back to Romans 8:38, that it could clearly fit there. Hey, submit. Listen, nothing can separate you from the love of God. Nothing can separate you from the love of God. Angels, earthly rulers, earthly powers, spiritual powers, nothing can separate you from God's love. It can be understood to be earthly powers there. Obviously, it's used that way in Titus 3:1, right? So that immediately is something we need to consider. The word principality, I just used it, looked it up in a Webster's dictionary. Principality, sovereignty, supreme power. A prince, one invested with sovereignty. It can refer to a prince. The territory of a prince. So it can simply refer to earthly power, people who have been put in charge, earthly power. That is very important to understand. It doesn't always have to refer to something spiritual. Now, we just got to keep that in mind, all right? We have to keep that in mind, how we understand those terms, and then we have to think about it. So we could say principalities and powers can refer to the spiritual realm, right? Fallen angels, angelic beings, which obviously includes Satan, because Satan obviously is a fallen angel. But it doesn't always have to do that. So let's consider some of the other places where this phrase is used, all right? So let's consider some of the other places where it's used. It's used in Colossians 1:16. Colossians 1:16. Colossians 1:16. Colossians 1:16, and we read this, Colossians 1:16, speaking of Christ, who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature, for by him, speaking of Christ, were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. All right. So all things, whether visible or invisible, are created by God. That can be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. Now, we could argue that all government, all earthly authority is ordained and instituted by God. That's, see Romans chapter 13. Go to Romans chapter 13. We've talked about this. We just talked about it a second ago, but now we'll read it. Romans chapter 13, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whatever, go back to Colossians 1:16, for by Christ were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. Now, does that necessarily mean that's referring to spiritual principalities and powers? Well, it could include that, because visible and invisible, no matter if it's earthly or spiritual, it was created by Christ. See, our presupposition just causes us to go, oh, principalities and powers. Oh, that's immediately referring to demonic spirits and angelic beings. Are we sure? We have to think this through. Romans 8:38 especially in the King James, gives me, wait a minute, it separates angels from principalities. That's a clue. And then Titus 3:1, using the exact same phrase, principalities and powers, clearly making it a reference to earthly power, begins to destroy that presupposition. And it helps clarify that the term can refer to earthly power and authority, or it could refer to fallen angels and demonic, depending on the context in which it is used. All right. Now, typically, people are going to refer to Colossians 1:16. This commentary that I have simply says Colossians 1:16, principalities and powers. And this verse, Paul makes it clear that the Lord is creator and ruler over all authorities, whether they submit or rebel against him. It doesn't identify whether the authority is heavenly or spiritual. It doesn't matter. Earthly, invisible, earthly or spiritual. Christ is creator. Christ is in charge. Whether it rebels against him or not, he's still the creator. He's still the one in charge. All right. The next place it is used, Colossians 2:15. Colossians 2:15. Colossians 2, let's go back to verse 14. Blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, he took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross, and having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them, or a shew of them, openly, triumphing over them in it. Now, this seems to say that Christ, when he went to the cross and died, that he made a show of them openly. He spoiled principalities and powers. In other words, whatever spiritual forces were there, he ultimately defeated them through what occurred on the cross. He ultimately defeated them. All right. Now, I don't think that fits with earthly powers there. One commentary says this: Paul teaches about the superior power of Jesus over all powers. The powers there are created by Christ and under his control. They are not to be feared because the cross has disarmed them. Jesus and his death took dominion from these powers when he took back what they had captured. Right. And did they ever truly have it captured? Whatever. Okay. So Christ, you could say no matter what the powers were, even earthly powers who may have thought, look, we crucified him, we killed him, whether it was the Jews wanting him to die, whatever, he ultimately triumphed over them because, he rose the third day, ascended to the right hand of the Father, who will come to judge the living and the dead. Those who say crucified him, ultimately he triumphed over and showed victory over spiritual and earthly powers. Maybe we've limited our understanding of that text in an incorrect way. Maybe so. Because again, we just see principalities and powers, and what do? Boom! We say, hey, that's demons. I think we've allowed our presuppositions to get in the way. Then this leads us to Ephesians 3:10, the very text in question. Ephesians 3:10. Now, this one has an interesting phrase that this one may clarify exactly what's being referred to here. This one, I think, is simple because of a very important phrase. Ephesians 3:10, to the intent that now unto the principalities and powers in heavenly places. Now, this clearly places where these principalities and powers operate. In heavenly places. Let's see if other translations clarify that as well here. Right? This one, I think we definitely know this one probably will not refer to earthly power. Yes, same thing. I'll read it from this Bible, Ephesians 3:10. His intent was that now through the church, the manifold wisdom of God should be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms. In the heavenly realm. So this one, there's no question. We know this is not earthly. We know this is referring to principalities and powers, earthly or spiritual, angelic beings that have fallen. I don't know. Again, it's plural, so I don't say you can just say how it's Satan. I don't even know how that's even an option. It's spiritual forces, fallen angels, demons, including Satan. Now, the question with this text, it becomes obvious. Okay. How does the church make manifest the manifold wisdom of God to these angelic beings. How do we understand this? Well, here's some thoughts, all right? And I'm just going to read from some different notes that I have put together from a lot of different sources, and I don't even have all the sources listed here, all right? Paul told us, and it may all come from one source. I have them in my notes, and so I didn't say which part came from where, if these are from multiple sources, all right? But Paul told us that the principalities and powers are also involved in this great secret. Now, the great secret, if you go back to verse 9 that he's referring to, is this mystery. Ephesians 3:9, and to make all men see what is the fellowship of the mystery, which from the beginning of the world hath been hid in God, who created all things by Jesus Christ. There was this great mystery, but finally, this mystery is being revealed, and it's being revealed to the intent, and now unto the principalities and powers in heavenly places might be known by the church the manifold wisdom of God. Something to do with this mystery is now being used to manifest the manifold wisdom of God to principalities and powers, to spiritual forces, right? Let's see where they go here. Paul told us that the principalities and powers are also involved in this great secret. God is educating the angels by means of the church. By the principalities and power, Paul meant the angelic beings created by God, both good and evil. So they say this is just principalities and powers are just angelic beings, both good and bad. Both good and bad. Not necessarily, these do not have to be Satan. This does not have to be demonic forces. It can just be all angelic beings, all angelic authorities and rulers. All right? Angels are created beings and are not omniscient. In fact, Peter indicates that during the Old Testament period, the angels were curious about God's plan of salvation then being worked out on earth. Let's look at 1 Peter chapter 1. Let's look at 1 Peter chapter 1. 1 Peter chapter 1. We'll get there, 1 Peter chapter 1, and then they want us to look at verse 10 and 11. All right? 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 10 and 11. Of which salvation the prophets, having inquired and searched diligently, who prophesied of the grace that should come unto you, searching what manner of time the Spirit of Christ which was in them did signify when it testified beforehand the suffering of Christ and the glory that should follow. Unto, and then it continues, unto whom it was revealed that not unto themselves, but unto us they did minister the things which are now reported unto you by them that have preached the gospel unto you, which the Holy Ghost sent down from heaven, which things the angels desire to look into. So the ultimate, the salvation, the whole way God was going to ultimately save people through Jesus Christ, by grace alone, through faith alone, because of Christ alone, that a holy God could save and deliver sinful people without compromising his holiness and justice. There's great wisdom in this, because God realized the only way he could save people is to, first of all, he has to find a way for someone to die who can actually take away their sins. Well, that's got to be someone who is sinless. Well, the only one who's going to be able to be sinless has to be deity. All right, there's the second person of the Trinity, the eternal Son of God. He has to be sinless. All right, so he has to be able to be a substitutionary sacrifice to die for us, has to take on human flesh to be able to die for men. All right, and there has to be a way that a transaction can occur, that my sins are then accredited to his account so that God can judge my sin on Jesus Christ, but then his righteousness can be imputed to me. The whole miracle of salvation was a mystery that was not completely understood. And the angels, they tried to understand how this was all going to work. Peter seems to be saying they were looking into it. And what Paul is seeming to say is the angels were looking into it, and now they are seeing God's manifold wisdom in the church. They're seeing people becoming saved, the formation of the church, of people who've been saved by the gospel of Jesus Christ. This was a great mystery. It's being revealed, and the church now is showing God's wisdom to the angelic beings. Certainly, the angels rejoice at the repentance of a lost sinner, and Paul suggested that the angels watch the activities of the local assembly. We are made a spectacle unto the world and to angels, Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 4:9. What then do the angels learn from the church? The manifold wisdom of God. Certainly the angels know about the power of God as seen in his creation, but the wisdom of God as seen in his new creation, the church, is something new to them. Unsaved men, including wise philosophers, look at God's plan at salvation and consider it foolishness. But the angels watch the outworking of God's salvation and they praise his wisdom. Paul called it manifold wisdom, and the word carries the idea of many-colored. This suggests the beauty and variety of God's wisdom and his great plan of salvation here. All right. So, and we could continue on, but you get the idea. So in Ephesians 3:10, it seems obvious to me. Now it does. Now, I'm not saying it should be obvious to everyone. After working through this one clearly is referring to angelic beings. Doesn't necessarily mean has to be satanic. That principalities and powers, angelic powers, spiritual powers and authority, no matter whom they may be, good or bad, fallen or not fallen, they witness and learn and behold the wisdom, the manifold wisdom of God in the church, seeing the salvation of sinful people by a holy God. How can I be reconciled to a holy God? Only the wisdom of God could come up with a solution where I could be saved, knowing that I cannot save myself. That doesn't compromise God's holiness or justice. His holiness and justice is still satisfied because he poured out his wrath on Jesus Christ because my sins were accredited to his account. His wrath, his justice, his holiness is kept intact. At the same time, his love, mercy, and grace is also kept intact. It's beautiful, it's powerful, it's wise, it's wisdom, and the angels are witnessed to that through the church, all right? And then Ephesians 6:12, which is the most famous passage, Ephesians 6:12. This one, we clearly know it's referring to angelic beings. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against the spiritual wickedness in high places. All right? We are fighting a spiritual war. And so obviously this would not be referring to good angels. This would be referring to fallen angels. As one commentary says it, Ephesians 6:12 describes the warfare in which Christians are engaged in. Having been saved, every Christian must continue to do good in light of the victory promised by God's word in Romans 8. Though they face an army of dark powers who have been disarmed from real power and against whom we have been promised a victory. Still, every Christian is to demonstrate and depend on God's power and wisdom and can do this by trusting in the finished and sufficient work of Jesus Christ. So principality and power. It's dealing with rulers and authority. It's dealing with that power may be shown in a lot of different ways, but it's just dealing with spirit. Well, it can deal with earthly power and authority, right? Earthly authority and power. You can have, in a sense, the office, the authority as the office, and then the power that comes from that office or comes from that position. All right. And there we, at the same time, principalities and powers can be earthly or it can be spiritual. It can be the spiritual authority as a fallen angel, and then the power that may flow from that. All right. It just refers to authority. It refers to power. Refers to being a ruler, and having authority and having power. It can refer to that from an earthly perspective or a spiritual perspective. The context describes how to understand it. The phrase is used 6 times. Romans 8:38 is the first clue. Wait a minute, it separates angels from principalities. That gives us the first clue. Titus 3:1 definitely drives home the point that principalities and powers can refer to earthly rulers who have power. And then the other passages, in most cases, clarify to say, hey, this is referring, at least in most of the cases, to spiritual beings who have authority and power. All right. And I think that clarifies everything that I need to clarify. Now, if you're listening to me live, this is a good time to ask a question. If you have a question, you got to ask it really quick because I'm almost done here. All right. I'm almost done with this live broadcast. All right. That went 49 minutes. Whew, 49 minutes. I hope we clarified everything. I hope we did. I hope we did. I hope we did. All right. No, I'm looking at the laptop, making sure I'm not getting any questions. Nobody is submitting any questions, so I'm going to take that. The reason you're not asking any questions is because my teaching is so in depth that you have no questions, because I answer every question before you can even ask it. Yeah, I'm joking around there. That's not being serious. All right, but I hope the lesson that we learned here is a couple of things. We need to learn to listen to preaching carefully, because again, I just feel. And I don't want to be super critical, but man, that sermon really just, when I was listening to that, I'm like, where is this going? It was so far removed from the actual text. So really, if you think of the text in question, Ephesians 3, 9, and 10, you have really three things to try to figure out from that text. Really, like if I was going to make 3 points from that text, what is the mystery? Who are principalities and powers, and how is the manifold wisdom of God made manifest to these principalities and powers in the church? That's really your 3 points. What is the mystery? Who are the principalities and powers? And how is the manifold wisdom of God made manifest to these principalities and powers? Those are really the 3 questions. The text itself gives you your points. Preaching is not to make points. Preaching is to proclaim the points the text is making. Preachers should not make points. We proclaim the points found in the text. Do we always do that? Absolutely not. Do we always fail to do that? Multiple times. I have, and so has every other preacher. All right. But you got to learn to listen and go, wait a minute. I think the text has been pushed aside here, and that can happen. All right. So there you have it. Hopefully that answers the question. No comments, no email, no comments in the chat. If you're emailing me, I'll check my email when I'm done. And if we need to come back, we'll come back and talk about this at a different time. There you go. I hope it did a good job. If it helped you in any way, shape, or form, if it helped clarify anything, if it was of any benefit, please let me know. newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. All right, everyone have a great day. God bless.